Right, so the ego, I wanted to take this episode or this moment to talk about the ego a little bit more in depth for those of you who don't know a lot about the ego, or you've heard it and you're like, what is that? You've heard Beyonce make songs of he has a big ego. I can go real deep into the ego. The ego is a very interesting thing because it's you need it, and it also can be your biggest enemy, as it proves to be for most of us. I mean, if your ego's your friend, you got to deal with other people's egos. If your ego is working against you, you have to build up your ego. So it's a fluid thing. I mean, the ego itself is a pretty constant thing. I mean, the ego was developed back, as life began on this planet. They call your amygdala, which is the first part of your brain that develops. It's the root of the brain, and the other aspects of the brain, your, what do they call it? You have your, your mammalian brain, and then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is on top of that, which is the newest part of the brain that's developed. But essentially, at the core of the ego are fears, okay? Fears are what has driven the ego for years before higher consciousness came into the picture. I mean, if we go back to the time of the dinosaurs, essentially beings were just living and eating and just, eating and fighting for power and survival. That is where the ego begins. I mean, it begins with primal animals living in a way where it was go here, go there. The benefit of it was that they got to experience reality, a reality that was very low level relative to the cosmos. When Earth was created, it was a planet that produced a very survivalistic entity to live. So of course, as humans came into the picture, we had to live as well. We had to coexist in this survival reality. And what that did was, of course, we have fears as well. Now, the way the ego existed, the way the ego experienced duality was, first it began with fear. As the ego became more adapted to the environment, and if the ego was blessed enough to thrive in the environment, to actually live and find a place on Earth, it would then begin to develop release, which was the opposite of fear, essentially. Fear is wanting to live, and you can imagine if you live, that's the opposite of fear, which is happiness. That's where this joy came. So as beings on Earth, whatever the timeline is to whoever, as we begin to live better with intelligence and begin to carve out a place more and more and begin to thrive more and more, we begin to experience the opportunity to have more polar fear, which was release, which we call joy, happiness, thankfulness. These are all just ways that your ego is happy to be alive and not be dealing with its fears or overcoming its fears. Now, over the time of overcoming more and more fears, the ego began to develop a place in the world. That's where you get that confidence aspect that came with ego. That's where the word ego itself in modern day represents caring about self or confidence, or he has a big ego, which means he has a big way of looking at himself. Because you have to imagine on a planet where you have dinosaurs, even in the present day, you got from lions to pit bulls to tigers to leopards to bulls. There's so many beastly things. There's so many diseases. There's so many things that can take out a person. When your ego has over time been able to survive and build in this environment, it naturally begins to feel a certain level of power. Because if there's a bull over there, if there's a lion over here, yet I have control of them, what does that say about my ego? It must be doing a pretty good job, It's keeping me alive amongst amongst things that are much bigger, more physically stronger than I am. So that's where the ego gained its power from. And over time, we carry this egos and pass it down, and essentially to the point where our egos begin to work against us. Because once we civilized society, this ego was still on its high horse. So guess what it put its attention on to next? Itself, other humans, other people, other beings that share this plight. And it did the same thing that it did to those animals against itself. It began to compare and want to have power over the next person, have control over the next person. We've seen it play out over years. We see whether it's patriarchy, men wanting to control women because of physical characteristics that make me bigger than her. You see, there's no greater reason behind it but just primal raw nature. Whether it's race, which has caused slavery and arguments amongst races because, well, I think my race is better, right? You think there's reason behind this. You think there's a valid point behind this. But all it is that ego, that same primordial thing that existed back when there were nothing but reptiles. And so the ego serves you because it allows you to live better in this environment. There's nothing wrong with that, but then it doesn't serve you. It begins to work against you when you begin to try to control people. When you try to control family or friends or your man or your woman or anything like that is when it begins to deal with a higher level of resistance now. Because now it's stepping out of its boundaries. But it feels justified to do so because when it looks outside, it says, well, look what I've built. Just that arrogance. It connects to other successes and takes it on as its own. I live in DC. The Wizards say they won the championship. All of a sudden, I feel good. Like I'm the one playing the game. When all I did was sit there and drink beer and watch the game. But I feel like I won. You see, that we're the best. That's not you, my friend. That's not you. That's the brain. And the worst part about it is, the only reason why the brain has been able to develop this high is because of outside forces. Things that exist outside of any reptile or any human. It was spirituality. It was the man's capacity and connection to divinity, to something greater that went into the body and took on the brain and helped align the animals for better, align the world for better. But now the brain has taken over this and thought it was himself, and now the brain is eating these animals, is basically being the biggest bully on the planet, when the only reason it was able to ascend or have more power over these other beings was because of something much less egoic. You see, the reason why animals are in place right now, the reason why you can step outside and live in an organized world is because of spirituality. People took on a brain, but used divinity and the universal laws and higher sciences to organize this primal, beastly existence, to be something greater. The problem is, once these people left, or once these people did their job, there still was a bunch of people being born with brains, thinking that the brain did that. When all the brain did was run away, honestly, and hide until higher faculties and different spiritual entities came into the picture to help give this beastly world more divinity. You see what I'm saying? More order and structure. You see, it's not about the ego. It's about knowledge and information. Now, if you understand on a higher level what information is, it's essentially light. It's real light. It's the light that allows you to pierce what your ego can't see. You see, the ego can't figure out that people can fly. The ego might see a bird and be like, well, maybe I can do what a bird can do, but the ego doesn't figure out how to do that. You see? It's higher laws that come into play. You see what I'm saying? It's looking beyond the ego. It was that person that said, well, my ego is saying I can't do this, but I know that something greater is telling me that I can do it. It's always this pull from an outside source that is unexplainable that leads to these great things that we learn. Einstein. I mean, all of these people, Einstein imagined himself as literally a cell or as a small piece of, I believe, light or something like that, and went into the DNA and imagined all of these things being something that wasn't who he was. He had to imagine being something greater, something more fluid. See, it always begins with the imagination, because the imagination is connected to spirituality. Because when you look at the imagination, there are no rules. Everything's possible in the imagination. And the only person that feels that is the ego, then, is the only person. The ego is really at effect to the mind. The mind sees all these possibilities. It's the mind that makes you imagine being something greater. It's the mind that makes you say, I can get past this. It's the mind that makes you say, well, maybe I can be this thing that I dream to be. It's your ego actually telling you that you can't be that, you see. See, this isn't a situation where it's your ego and you're trying to balance the ego. See, you're just balancing the ego so that you can really deal with the mind, because the mind is really where it goes down. The mind is where the dreams come true. Because if you leave it up to your ego will always be afraid. Your ego will always give you a reason why you can't do that. Your ego will always give you a reason as to why this is that and that is that. Your ego is just trying to rationalize something that's inconceivable. And your mind, essentially, is helping your ego cope with what is inconceivable. So what it does is it provides symbols and ways to help direct the ego to something higher. But the ego itself is nothing but a basic tool, okay, to navigate through the world. And it's predicated on fear. Now, because of our development, because of spirituality, which goes back to ancient times, understand that spirituality existed before anything that you learned is a higher science. Understand that whatever you learned in school is a cheap rendition of what the ancients already knew. You know what I mean? Whatever they teach you in the history books, which begins, what, with AD or before Jesus, this is baby years compared to how long the earth's been around. I mean, this is like a grain of sand compared to the beach of sand. You know, the amount of sand on the beach is how long the planet's been here. And then that one grain of sand is what we talk about when it comes to our religions and our timelines for reality. I mean, the ancients knew all of this stuff already. Mathematics were already well established before any European or Greek philosophy came into the picture. That's what they don't tell you. They don't want you to know that your brain isn't all that. That your brain is nothing but a primal tool that you use to navigate the world, and how the brain actually needs to be neutralized if you really want to have any true joy or true heightened experiences on this planet. It won't happen as long as you're dependent on the ego. So with that being said, I just wanted to talk about this so that you can keep that ego in context. Understand that the ego is definitely a wonderful tool. It was obviously created by nature, so it had its place. But if you're going to really embrace that ego, you know, you got to use it for what it is, which is to do the earthly things. You know, attraction. I teach attraction, things like that, amongst men and women, and dating and things like that, and even relationships. I'll leave it like this. The ego does play a role in the dating level, in the early level, because these are the primal attractions we're dealing with. The primal arousals, or the way to trigger interest to the ego. But all that is the beginning. Because if you ever want to build something much greater, much higher, build a relationship, build a level of attraction that the ego couldn't even imagine, now you're dealing with spirituality. Now you're dealing with higher laws that exist outside of what any being can tell you. And my last thing I'll tell you about the ego is this. If you want to experience the primal aspects, then communicate with animals. Even animals have a spirit. So don't get that. And I'll talk about spirituality and what's the difference between the physical world and the spiritual world, and the soul, all these things that sound so... I can help you understand these with very, very relative ease. They're very simple concepts. They've just been left in the dark, and I'm here to bring light to them. But the ego is basically you talking to a bird, or you looking at an animal or a dog. You know, you feed your dog, and after a while, the dog likes you and begins to care about you. You know, you take care of your child long enough, the child eventually begins to care about you. See, the ego is all about pro quo. It's all about what have you done for me lately? I love you so much now because that car looks so nice. Or, wow, baby, thank you so much for getting me this. I appreciate you. See, this is the ego. You know, and when you understand it, it's all just a game. It's all illusion. It's all about, you know, what's the best right now. You know, if you base a relationship off the ego, you'll have the woman or the man in your life for now, but you probably won't have them later because somebody else will feed their ego differently, and soon that will take its course. If you ever want anything real, anything that lasts, you're dealing with spirituality. That's why no matter what you look at, the books that matter to this society the most, your Bibles, your religious texts, the Quran, whatever religious text you believe in, you notice how these last for so long. It's because they deal with something that hits people more than just mathematics, which you learn in school. And that's for a reason. It's because they're giving you a taste of something that's greater. And what that is spirituality and being connected to cosmic understandings. So, as you begin to understand the universal laws, it will help you understand the way this ego works. And it will also help you understand, you know, what's bigger than the ego, what exists outside of the ego. And, you know, that's what I've been on my journey to figure out. That's what I've been on my journey to learn, because I've experienced a bunch of ego pleasures, and what you'll realize is they only take you so far. You know, your one ego pleasure is only as good as the next one. And if the next one isn't good enough, you'll be miserable again. You know. So with that being said, I want this to be something to help you be free, to help you realize that whatever attachments you have, whether good or bad, don't let it consume you. Don't let it do too much to you, because it's all not you, because you're much greater. That's why you never feel that good when you deal with these problems, because you're like, your core essence knows that it's bigger than that. It's more to you than that. See, animals can deal with this stuff. That's why animals haven't evolved. Their egos are stagnant, and, you know, they evolve very slowly. But, you know, a pig is a pig, a dog is a dog. You know, they accept their plight in life. They don't really deal with all these problems. That's why their ego is kind of at peace. Because no matter how miserable a dog may feel or unfree a dog may feel, the next moment, its ego is there. You don't have that experience for some reason. Why is that? Why can't you just be happy just like the dogs you look at other animals with this power that you have on the planet? Yet every day people are taking pills. People are trying to drown their sorrows. People are complaining. You know, people aren't happy all the way. And that lets you know it's not about the brain. The brain will never give you the happiness you're looking for. It will just give you temporary happiness that's predicated on you just feeling like you're better than the next situation. If you want true freedom, true happiness, true power, you're going to have to tap into something that goes beyond the ego. And lucky enough for us, compared to animals, that knowledge exists. And it's here now. And now is the time to use it. So I hope I helped you understand the ego, why you shouldn't let it consume you, why you should use it like the same way you use a car. You know, like, use it like you use your car. Like, okay, I need to get around. That's what your ego is. All right, I'm on Earth. I got to get around. That's cool. But always keep it balanced and don't let it bring anything negative out of you, because the minute it does that, it's once again just has you locked in. It's trying to survive. So, you know, with that being said, you know, treat your ego like your young friend and guide it with spirituality. And I hope you learn from this, and I hope this allows you to feel more free and more powerful, because that's what you essentially are. And according to many spiritualists, the ego and the brain is actually the most evil creation in the cosmos. This brain you have right here is the most evil thing, because it splits that which is infinite and forces you to not be in touch with the infinite, because it keeps you split and dualized in reality. Even when you look at your days, there's night and there's day. You know, you're forced to have to view reality like this because of this ego. And it does this for you to learn lessons. So learn the lessons, but don't let it consume you, because I promise you, you are much greater than this brain ever can be, because you are forever and this brain isn't. So with that being said, I hope you learn from that, and I leave you in peace and blessings, and I hope you stay tuned for my next video coming soon.